Hello, I'm Jeremy Fernandez, joining you this week from Perth. Australia is getting ready for a massive national vaccine rollout, and there's promising data emerging on the efficacy of the Pfizer jab. Vaccination hubs are right now being set up across the country. About 240 aged care facilities in nearly 200 towns will be the first places to offer the Pfizer vaccine from Monday. There'll also be 16 vaccination hubs at hospitals in major cities. The first 142,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccine arrived earlier this week. They'll be given to those in Group 1A, which comprises quarantine and border workers, those in aged care and disability residents and workers. This program is being called the biggest and most complex task of its kind in the nation's history.
We know we are asking a lot of everybody in this huge and complex task, and much of it is being done very quickly but safely. Our mantra has been we want to vaccinate Australia as safely and quickly as possible.
Here's Casey Briggs to explain how the rollout will work.
Plane by plane, country after country is now welcoming first deliveries of a COVID-19 vaccine. Israel is currently going the hardest and fastest, with the highest vaccination rate in the world and near universal vaccinations for its oldest residents. Small countries like the Seychelles have an easier task of mass vaccinating, while the UAE has also made it a priority. Then comes the United Kingdom and the United States, which is currently administering more than 1.5 million doses a day on average, adding to the more than 170 million needles that have gone into arms globally in just the last 3 months. Australia is currently at 0, but that will change from Monday.
The Eagle has landed.
142,000 doses of Pfizer vaccine arrived this week. An important start, but it is just a start. With roughly 25.7 million Australians, including children, that's 51.4 million doses needed to vaccinate everyone. The federal government says it plans to do that by the end of October, roughly 250 days to get the job done. So that means delivering more than 200,000 doses every day from Monday, 7 days a week. If we pull that off, it would be one of the fastest rollouts in the world. Australia's vaccination speed would be 70% higher than the current per capita rate in the United States, where they're facing issues with supply.
We're vaccinating people faster than new vials are arriving here in Los Angeles. And I'm very concerned right now. I'm concerned as your mayor that our vaccine supply is uneven, it's unpredictable, and too often inequitable.
But even if we also have speed bumps, we're still in better shape than many countries. Of all the world's vaccine orders, the wealthiest countries have snapped up more than half the supply, or almost 3.5 doses per person. The rest of the world has got orders in for less than 0.4 doses per person. Even if they got all the doses currently on order through the international COVAX program, they're still well short of enough doses for widespread vaccination. So, which countries will get the jab first and who will lag? The Economist Intelligence Unit came up with this roadmap. It estimates that most of Europe and the United States will likely have widespread vaccine coverage later this year. But it doesn't think Australia will get there until 2022, along with countries like Brazil and Mexico. Many of the poorer countries in Africa and parts of Asia, for them the timeline pushes out to 2023.
As we speak, rich countries are rolling out vaccines, while the world's least developed countries watch and wait.
This is a global pandemic. It needs a global response. We need to consider what that looks like in every country, because if the COVID virus is still in any country, it's still potentially in every country.
And on the current timeline, we're stuck with this pandemic for a very long time to come.
The AstraZeneca vaccine will now officially also be part of this rollout after the regulator approved its use here. The Therapeutic Goods Administration says it can be used for over 18s, but will only be given to those aged over 65 on a case-by-case basis. While people in that age bracket demonstrated a strong immune response, there were not enough infections in the clinical trials to determine the overall efficacy. Australia has secured just under 54 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine, which will be produced in Melbourne. The Australian Medical Association is expecting the rollout will run smoothly. I caught up with the head of the AMA, Dr. Omar Khurshid, earlier.
Australia has had the fantastic opportunity of having time to plan this vaccine rollout, from vaccine approval through to the logistics of getting the vaccine into the arm of every Australian. So I think our agencies are as ready as they could expect to be, certainly as ready as any other country around the world has been in starting their programs. But we shouldn't underestimate the size of the challenge ahead, particularly once we get into the later phases of the rollout, getting to all 20 million eligible Australians.
The government's been under pressure to explain why it is this rollout plan is taking place so late relative to other countries. What have we gained from this extension of time?
The main thing we've gained is time to properly assess the two vaccines that have been through our Therapeutic Goods Administration, or TGA, process. These two vaccines, the AstraZeneca vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine, have now got provisional approval. Sounds a bit temporary, but in fact that is the normal process for vaccines to go through. They've been given the tick, and that means every Australian lining up for a vaccine will know that these vaccines have got Australia's approval for being safe and being effective, and that's something that you would never have with an emergency approval, which is what happened in the rest of the world.
And do you expect that to counter some of the vaccine hesitancy that we are seeing across the community?
Well, it means that we can go out there with a very straight face to the whole Australian community and say these vaccines are safe. We're sure. We're as sure as we can be with any other vaccine, with any other medication, and that should not be a worry for the average Australian.
We're looking at something like 200,000 people a day getting vaccinated across Australia right up till October, that October deadline. Is that deadline realistic?
I think that deadline is going to be really hard to achieve. Scott Morrison has set a pretty high bar for our state governments, our federal health department and our general practitioners throughout the country to achieve. If there's going to be any chance to meet that target, we need CSL to make the vaccine quicker than what was originally planned. Otherwise there just won't be the vaccine out there to be delivered to Australians. And we also need the program to be expanded to every general practice so that people can know they can go to their usual general practitioner in their normal way, not having to worry about finding a new practice, where to go, how to make an appointment, etc. And it also means that GPs can proactively contact their patients to encourage them to come in and at least have a conversation about the vaccine.
One of the key things people are very concerned about is the efficacy of these vaccines against some of these more virulent, more transmissible strains. Will that hold things back?
The new strains have certainly got the potential to hold back the opening of our borders, because even if we get everyone vaccinated against the current strains and we're comfortable with the effectiveness of the vaccines against those strains, a new strain poses a new threat, and it takes time to know whether our vaccines are going to be effective against new strains. So we will need that multi-pronged strategy to enable Australia to navigate this COVID future that I think we're all heading towards. It will include new vaccines. We're likely to need boosters, and maybe not because our immunity is waning to the old vaccine, but maybe because we need a new immunity to a new strain. And we're reasonably confident that that'll be part of the future for us going forward.
The global fight against COVID-19 appears to have turned a corner, with the number of new infections easing in most affected countries. It seems vaccines are a big part of that slowdown. Almost 200 million doses have been delivered worldwide. The US is vaccinating 1.5 million people each day, and the number of new infections in England has fallen by 2/3 in the period immediately after the rollout began. And new data out of the world's fastest vaccination program in Israel shows the Pfizer jab has been 90% effective in reducing infections there. Eliza Harvey takes a look.
Israel has this week vaccinated more than 4 million people against COVID-19, more than 40% of its population, as it continues to roll out the world's fastest inoculation campaign. More than 5,400 people have died of COVID-19 in Israel, in a country of just over 9 million. Authorities are bringing vaccination centres into the community to make it easier to access.
Incentivising people also by creating a friendly atmosphere, giving them food and drink, a family-like atmosphere to allow the people that are still a bit hesitant to come and vaccinate themselves as well.
But more than 500,000 people above the age of 50 are still choosing not to be vaccinated.
I want to tell you that almost 100% of deaths and severe illness are in this age group. And when you're not getting vaccinated because of this tiny prick that has no significance, at worst some side effects of discomfort for a few hours, you take upon yourselves danger of death and severe illness with coughs that can remain for your entire life.
Data from the vaccination program, analysed by doctors at the country's largest health fund, have shown that there are 94% fewer infections among the vaccinated group. It suggests the Pfizer vaccine is performing just as well in a larger population as it did in clinical trials. And the vaccine prevented almost all cases of serious illness. But it doesn't reveal if the Pfizer vaccine will stop transmission of the virus. Despite the rapid pace of vaccination, doctors say that unvaccinated people are still at risk of severe illness, prompting the government to keep the country's lockdown in place.
Dr. Norman Swan says the positive data gathered this week around the world bodes well for Australia's program.
The efficacy is really what you get in a trial, in a kind of slightly artificial world of a clinical trial. Effectiveness is what you get in the real world. So now you've got real world data coming in, and probably the best real world data is coming from Israel, where just about half the population has been immunized. And they've got fantastic electronic health records there, so they're able to compare. And what's showing up is that the effectiveness of the Pfizer vaccine is around about the same as they found in the trial, over 90%. So that's effectiveness at actually preventing the symptoms, particularly the serious symptoms, but all the symptoms of COVID-19.
There was some critical approval granted by the TGA in this past week. How significant is that, and what is it that the TGA will have been looking out for before approving the AstraZeneca vaccine?
So at the beginning, they had a British trial, and they assumed that a certain vaccine that was coming in was more concentrated than it was, and they ended up giving a half dose followed by a full dose to a few thousand people under 55, and they got quite good effectiveness from that, about 90%, whereas when they gave 2 full doses, they only got 62% effectiveness at preventing symptoms, although nearly 100%, if not 100%, in both ways, of preventing severe disease. And before I go on, all the vaccines seem to be preventing severe disease. So what we're doing with COVID-19 vaccines is converting it into the common cold. And that's what we should be focusing on with vaccines in 2021. Reducing transmission is another issue. So they looked at that, but they also looked at dosage. And in the trials that have been done in the vaccines, they've compressed the dosage trials. So they've been finding the right dose as they've gone along to get this done quickly. And with the Astra vaccine, they tried seeing whether or not it would work as a single-dose vaccine. They found out that it wouldn't. So the people who were on the single-dose trials, about 17,000 people, then went on to get a second dose. And a few thousand of those got their second dose about 12 weeks after the first dose. And what they found was that those people got round about 82% effectiveness compared to 62, which is a great increase, and anything up to actually 90% effectiveness. So that was good news, and that's in fact what the TGA has done. So safe, effective and dose, and that's what they've approved.
A number of people have written to us asking what happens if you get the second shot of your vaccine past the recommended window, which has happened in some parts of the world. Do you see it happening here, and what happens if that occurs?
Well, here you're going to be registered with the Australian Immunisation Register, which will allow for the recall so that you get recalled at the right time. It's not exactly known with the Pfizer vaccine what happens when there's a later return. You wouldn't want it to be too late because the trial showed it was 3 or 4 weeks where you got the effective antibody response. But in Britain, they are delaying it a bit longer, and they do seem to be getting a good response. So I don't think you need to worry if it's a week or two. If it's a couple of months, then you may be missing the boat. With the Astra vaccine, it's actually good to wait a little while. So if you can wait the 3 months, that's a good thing to do.
That's the show for this week. Join us every Friday at this time on the News Channel, as well as on demand on iView and ABC News on YouTube. From all of us for now, Goodbye.